welcome to the second day of the ongoing program of the Ubuntu Symposium. I'm just going to be welcoming in people to this session, calling in from Melbourne, Australia. Welcome, everyone. Please say hi in the chat box as you're coming along. Lots of familiar people I recognize and a few people joining who I don't know yet. So please just say hi in the chat box. I'm not sure if we're going to have an opportunity for everyone to say hello as well at some point. But yeah, glad to be saying some introductory words on this session because this is my first session doing so. We've got, I'm just going to run through a couple of things, which I hope you're all already aware of, but I know there's a lot of information going out at the moment. We have a event app. I'm hoping everybody has had a chance to log in and check it out. If I just share my screen as well, you can see a bit more information. And this is where we're going to be posting not only the links to future sessions, but we're also going to be uploading past sessions. And we're going to be doing that as quickly as possible. But as you can imagine, there's loads and loads of content. We have so much video stuff that we're running through from last week, and we're going to try and get that online as quickly as possible. We'll be sending out emails when that's available. You can go there to find the program, the speakers, links to sessions, that kind of thing, and recordings. There's discussion boards, and we'll be posting some prompts for people on there. And you can also access this app in French and Spanish. And you find it actually at this link, bit.ly/Ubuntu portal. But you can also just go to the event website and click the button at the top that says portal. Other than that, I'm going to, as we have a few more people joining, I'm going to quickly just run through some of the things we've got coming up. So tomorrow, there's 5 parallel sessions, and that's the way we're running the symposium over the next month, which is Thursdays is parallel sessions, and those are the ones that are really driven by the many concepts that were submitted by partners and members. We had hundreds of submissions in the end, and the way that we're managing to include all of these different amazing ideas, and I'll run through some of them. The lineup for tomorrow is amazing, actually, but we're running them in parallel. They'll be available to watch back. You can check the ones in the app that you're interested in. You can even add like a star in it and put it into your own program, the ones that you're interested, and we'll be adding those in as we go. And tomorrow, this is our first day of parallel sessions. We've got a break-in youth caucus, which is about leveraging power with transnational youth approaches to women's rights. So that sounds like a really exciting session. There's another one on prevention of men's violence against women and girls in Madagascar and Rwanda. So really looking at some case studies there, including from the home of this symposium in Rwanda. So looking forward to that. There's another session called Politics of Care, which is really about, it's actually the first of 4 parts about a discussion of how elements of care, ethics of care, and the feminist notion of care, and how that should be applied to the work that we're doing as well as feminist and pro-feminist organizers with men and boys and masculinities. And in addition, there's masculinities and COVID-19. This is, a really big topic, and I'm sure many of you have seen the article that Sandy Ruxton and Stephen Burrell co-authored. It was online near the beginning of the pandemic, and then they co-authored a report with Promundo. And basically that report is going to be the basis of this discussion and the findings there. So I'm looking forward to seeing that. And then the 5th session tomorrow is the impact of COVID on SRHR, on sexual and reproductive health and rights of women and girls. And that's in collaboration with Sonke. We've got speakers from UNFPA, loads of great speakers for that one. So, speakers from Campaign to End FGM, and a lot of great people for that lineup. I think that's all I wanted to run through We've got a small group of us today, and I think crucially, a lot of online organizing like this, one of the benefits is you can watch it back, and we're going to be putting the recording of this online, so people don't have to join live, and that's a great benefit of doing it this way. Today's session is all about cross-regional, cross-pollination of ideas, of experiences, and I think that was one of the things during organizing that came out as a strong call from members in different regions, is that we wanted to have a lot of interaction between regions. I know it can feel like working in different bubbles in different parts of the world. So this is all about breaking down those bubbles, having a great conversation, and let's hope we can exchange ideas and experiences. So with that, I'm going to pass over to Laxman, who is our moderator today. I'll be monitoring the chat box for any questions as well. And yeah, over to you, Laxman.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you all for joining today. So as Tom mentioned, the intention for these cross-regional exchange or cross-regional roundtables, as we call them, is to have a conversation from colleagues from across the regions. And there won't be any PowerPoint presentations as such, but because it will be, our intention is to make it a conversation based on some ideas that will come up from the conversation. And this will be, something that each one, the representatives from which, respective regions will be having conversation with each other as well. So it's rather than a conversation with the moderator, it's a conversation among the group of people who we have today, who will be sharing some of the examples, the insights from what they are doing from in the respective regions or country networks. And we have a great lineup today with amazing representatives from our regions. So very quickly, I will not go in detail to introduce them today, which they will do themselves as well. So while we are waiting for our colleagues from Africa region to join in, seems like there seems to be some confusion around the time. So they are trying to join in right now. So let me start with a very quick introduction of the remaining ones that we have in the order of, alphabetical order in terms of the region. So we have Teresa, who is joining us from Austria, and she is the director of POICA and recently joined another network, as she said yesterday. And POICA is an organization that works with boys, and Teresa has been the director since 2012. She is now the co-coordinator of MenEngage Europe as well, and has been in the steering committee for quite some time. And she is also the manager at the Austrian Network for the Prevention of Sexualized Violence Against Children and Youth. That's Teresa, and also joining in from Europe, we have Jens. So Jens is the director of an organization called Emancipator, and he has been in this field for quite some time, a leading voice and thought leader and innovator in some innovative works with regards to how do we really bring men and boys into the kitchen. And since then, that's what I remember when we first met, we were having conversation on kitchen table, and it's been an amazing journey to have you, Jens. And he has been the previous co-coordinator of MenEngage Europe as well, and now is the steering committee member for the region. Then lined up, we have Samita Sukatimala, who is the current coordinator of MenEngage South Asia. She also has been the coordinator for MenEngage Network and one of the founding core members of MenEngage Network in Sri Lanka. And she has been one of the key person and driver of this work in the country and recently in the region. And she is associated with an organization called Foundation, FIST, Foundation for Innovative Social Development, Innovation and Social Development, and being the director there. And we will hear more about her amazing works and the very grassroots level work with young boys as well from Sri Lanka. Also, we have lined up Bilkis from Pakistan, who is the director of Sirakat Partnership for Development. And Bilkis, I only see your forehead. So if you can tilt your camera more, we can see your face. Perfect. And she is the immediate past coordinator of MenEngage South Asia as well. And she has been one of the key figures in Pakistan as well as in South Asia in this work. And she has long been associated with the women's rights movement in Pakistan and South Asia, and been leading some innovative work around economic empowerment and in conjunction with how do we really bring men and boys into the picture. Also, sort of, strengthening the relationship with the feminist movement. That's South Asia. And then we have Anthony from Lebanon. And Anthony is the lead on men and masculinities work in the organization, which is a women's rights organization in Lebanon called Abad. And again, a very well-known figure in this field, especially on the very effective and innovative ways on engaging men across the age range. And he is one of the founders of an innovative work on how do we use psychosocial lens or approach to really engage men on transforming masculinity. So we will hear more as well from Anthony. And we have been also in MenEngage for quite some time. So he has been there as a representative for MENA region, where we are trying to have a new regional network set up for quite some time for MenEngage. Now I see M4 joining as well. Welcome. So M4 is from Lesotho, and she is again one of the pioneers of this work and somebody who has been with MenEngage Africa for quite some time, since its foundation, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, and has been one of the leading voices to question, that the work with men needs to be feminist informed and what that means, and has been the founding member of MenEngage Network in Lesotho. Thank you, M4, for joining. And we are waiting for one more colleague from Africa region, so hope he will be able to join in, David from Sierra Leone. So, and then the rest of the participants, it's great to have you on board. So maybe if you can just say hello, since we are not that too many right now, just say your name, where you are joining in from.
Hello, everyone. I'm from Lesotho.
Can you hear us well, M4?
Yes, I can hear you clearly, Glassman.
Perfect, thank you. Yeah, maybe.
I'm Shay, I'm from Ireland.
Hey, Shay.
Hello, I'm Yorgos Nikolaidis. I'm from Athens, Greece, from Gender Alliance Initiative. I'm really happy to be here.
Hey, good to see you. Your name is quite familiar.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, Lewis?
Yeah, hi, this is Luis from Sweden. Good morning, nice to see you all.
Hey, Lewis. Adolf? Or Paul?
Hello, everyone. Good morning from Nigeria. Nice to be here.
Thank you for joining. So with this, then let's get started while we continue waiting for David from Sierra Leone. So yeah, so to get us started, so maybe we'll go to each one of the speakers in, again, as I said, in the alphabetical order of the name of the region. So we'll start with Africa. And we know each of the regions, you have had your own regional sessions as well last week as a part of the opening 3-day sessions. So while you introduce and say hello and add, if I have missed anything, to introduce you in that introduction, would you like to then share with us one issue or topic or matter that really stood out for you from the regional sessions that you have had last week. So over to you, Mfo. And if you can turn your video on, that would be great if your internet connection allows that.
Yes, my internet allows that. Thank you very much for the 5G. Yes.
Over to you.
So I think my takeaways from the regional conversations in the past week was the economic impact that this whole gender inequality issue has on women. And there were multiple approaches to that. Other countries had an issue around, the power of FGM on women and the power of child marriages on women, as well as the patriarchal power control on the, as a hegemonic system. And this is not new. But being a gender activist, part social entrepreneur as well, the economic issue for me was a really major takeaway for me, and I would like to have more conversations about that. Thank you.
Thank you. So then we move on to Europe. Would you like to go, Teresa?
Yes, thank you, Laxman. And I'm also very happy to be joining this conversation. And I really thought about what was my takeaway from from Europe. And all my colleagues from Europe who are present can, of course, then chip in. I think this would be interesting. But the major takeaway for me was why is it so in Europe regarding gender equality, because we have so many resources, we have so much wealth, and we also have the laws from the European Union, but somehow it still seems to be still a minority program, because from what I took away also from our speakers, from Jens and Leila, and also I know from our internal discussions, is that people were so happy when they found MenEngage Europe, because it is still not a mainstream program to be for gender equality, and especially for boys and men. And I also see it in my daily work. And this is just an issue that I think we really need to think about, because we cannot say, yes, we do not have these resources, or we lack, of course we lack funding, and we would need more and more. But from a European perspective in the global world, I think we really could do more. And I'm asking myself why, what is holding us back? So this is one of my takeaways. Thank you.
Great. Over to you, Jens. The same question.
Yeah, my God. Sorry. I feel immediately the urge to reflect on what Teresa said. I think Europe thinks it's better than the rest of the world, so that's why we don't have to change, but we want to change everyone else. What I took away from last week is that on one hand we all have our struggles externally to work on gender justice in our communities, in our countries, in Europe as a whole. And at the other hand, there's a very interesting process going on in the development of MenEngage Europe itself. I think we made great progress in the past years, having more than 90 members now from over 30 countries, which is an integration process in itself, and not just country-wise and with so many different languages and backgrounds. What did I want to say? But also because I think MenEngage in Europe, at least, we more and more manage to connect with networks and organizations that not so long ago didn't want to be feminist informed, were anti-feminist informed, or had at least mixed feelings about that. And we got some men's organizations, networks now to join MenEngage, and organizations to join MenEngage, that really helps us build more mass and more momentum from within the movement, but still in a situation where we are a very small movement. If we see all the populist, reactionary, strongman movements growing in the same time. And sorry, finally, one takeaway that I thought was very interesting was that I realized we have an oral tradition in MenEngage Europe. We have talks about our archives and how to communicate our histories and our agreements and the decisions we made to our new members. But actually what happens is that MenEngage traditions get passed on in live meetings. So we need live meetings. We need to meet and sit with each other and to be present with each other. And then we convey who we are actually, and not in the words that we put on paper. That was for myself an eye-opener. Thank you.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm sure there are so many points we can dig into. So before that, then I will go on to Anthony. The same question to you too. No, not maybe the irrelevance of the question is the regional consultation, but just share what you think is the most urgent issue, emerging issue that you would like to share with us today.
Sure. Thank you, Lakshman, for having us and for setting this series of conversations, which are so important for us and I think for everyone in the network. The major takeaway from myself, if I might kind of zoom out and see what the issue was as a whole, is interacting with governments and the political will within governments in the region, and not just governments, influential figures, whether they be religious leaders or lawmakers. So there are different issues. I think regionally, not just in Lebanon, there has been great work being done on faith and gender and working through different faith orientations and belief systems and the issues of gender and how those aren't necessarily antagonistic to one another. And it really depends on our cultural understanding of it. But how is that work going with religious leaders when we talk about deviating from personal status laws or from religious laws and the loss of power that comes with it? Is there a buy-in? This year has been very, very difficult, not just because of the COVID-19 crisis, but because of the current situation in Syria, because of the constant situation in Yemen, the different regional actors who are involved in those conflicts, refugee conflicts in Lebanon. And this year we ourselves went through a bit of a attempted political revolution and the Beirut explosion that happened in August. And so a lot of our conversations also are in how much NGOs are filling the gaps whenever these crises happen, because governments are failing to do so, and the trying to combat against the deprioritization of women's issues and gender while doing all of that work. So those were just a couple of the main takeaways concerning political will of our stakeholders and our authority figures.
Thank you, Anthony. Absolutely. So yeah, there are many points we will further dig into as well. And I see David must have been with us now. David, are you there? Can you hear us? Nope. Okay, while we wait so let's move on to South Asia. Yeah, over to you, Samita. The same question. What has been the most outstanding issue, or something that you would think would worth sharing today from the consultation you had last week?
Hello to everyone. Taking from the South Asia Roundtable, which happened last week, we actually had few issues that was highlighted in terms of networking and accountability, and also on the terms of impact that we had made within the region. But I will focus on the accountability concerns that came up in the regional roundtable. Because that was the major one that everybody wanted to talk about. Everybody had a very critical reflection of their own networks and South Asia as a whole in terms of accountability. Although a lot of things had gone into the process of putting things in order, we also thought that there are huge gaps in terms of, accountability to our own selves, to our alliance members, and, like as a whole to men and masculinity work, and also to the feminist movement and to our own constituencies. So these were some of the highlights that came in with the roundtable, where we talked about the gaps in our own mechanisms, our own strategies, both in terms of the programming that we do and also on the governance when it comes to the alliance, and in terms of, reflecting on the leadership, be mindful of our work, that kind of, whether it really contributes to the enhancement of the lives of women, and also in terms of our relationship with the broader feminist movement. And I think that was the major highlights of the roundtable. I'm sure Bilkesh also would add on to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Samita. Absolutely, some key important points that is relevant for all the reasons as well. And yeah, over to you, Bilkis. What's your key takeaway from the conversation you had last week?
Yeah, thank you very much, Samita, for really, recapping the main points. What was my takeaway was also discussion on neo-colonial attitudes, particularly in the region where nobody is willing to speak to anyone else, India, Nepal, Pakistan, Bangladesh, everybody has their own, diplomatic instability, political instability. And in terms of economic justice, the discussion around IFIs and the wave in domestic violence, and really how masculinities played up in this scenario. And then one of the points also was around, climate change negatively impacting women. So, those were the main points that we really need to take the discussion forward as well. Thank you very much.
Wonderful.
Over to you.
Thank you, Bilkis. You interesting. So the new topic you bring, the climate change, is something we have to further delve into and have more conversation. And before we go to the second round, I just want to make sure, David, are you able to hear us and join us? I see your name and you are on mute, but we can't hear you. Not sure if you are hearing us. Yeah, looks like there is an issue with the connection. So we'll continue trying with David. So I wanted to then build on to what you all just shared, given the landscape we are in right now. And then if you have to then sort of do an analysis from a men and masculinities perspective, or the lens that we often talk about, and then also a reminder that this is a conversation among yourself as well. So rather than a conversation with me, try to engage with each other. And if you have any questions or anything that you would like to ask your fellow colleagues from other regions, feel free to do that. But I also wanted to start from the state of the field, and that where, how do you then, looking at what is there, which you slightly shared, how do you see then the work of the alliance resonating with the context that you are in? How do you see this work contributing into the challenges you just mentioned in your respective regions? How do you connect the work with men and boys? And sometimes we refer it as men and masculinities lens, and there are different preferences. Some have started calling it gender transformative work with men and boys, or around transforming masculinities. So anyone who would like to start?
Yes, I would love to start.
Go ahead.
Let me put my, I'm sorry. Let me put my, I would love to start because for me, being in the Africa region, sometimes this kind of conversations get to be quite interesting. And also because I'm a much more simpler person in terms of what is it that we are doing, and how is the alliance contributing into the narrative, the entire narrative. And yes, much as I have pointed to some of I do come as a person as well. I do understand that, yes, we are dealing with structural issues and systemic issues, but tend to move away from who we are in terms of the people that we talk to. That what I've picked up from conversations since I have been part of this is a lot of in these conversations. When we engage, has been, who are these men? And for me, I've always said, this men that I'll talk to will be my father, my uncle, my brother, and those that are around me, or I go to a circle of that I know. And yes, I do understand that. Yes, we tend to be influenced by grant money, funding money, in terms of the voice behind us, which for me sometimes is also quite problematic because it limits the conversations of my context. And I've always said, from my context, in the Lesotho context, which most people know or don't know, or some people know or don't know, is that I come from a society where women, for instance, the issue of FGM, it's a choice issue for people to do with economic, relatableness, nothing like that. But then we are supposed to talk about FGM. So what does it do in my context? Because if I go to my village to talk about FGM, the women in the village look at me like, but no man is forcing us to do this, as we are choosing this because we want to, because there is something we get. I don't know what they get out of that because I've not gone there. But there is something they get in terms of legitimacy as community members. I don't know. So sometimes this kind of issues become problematic. I come from a community, I know that others may not be as Lesotho, and yes, I'm speaking to conversations that are in the African region last week. The Lesotho is a unique society or community in its own, because we come from a community where girls go to school. We are to school because that is the only way you can make it up in societal. Boys, on the other hand, are the ones that we should be concentrating on, because unlike girls, they don't go to school. So balancing out these conversations in terms of what happens in Nigeria and what happens in Kenya and what happens in Ghana. High rate of multiple of conversations of how do we then bring this whole thing to make it look like it's standard. For others, it can be standard. But what I'll acknowledge is that there is high acknowledgeable inequalities that I would say they are standard across the board. For instance, economic inequalities, that is a standard everywhere, which is for me, which is where I as a person, for me, I would say, what are we doing about that? As coming from, I know that we have statistics that shows that women-led organizations don't get as much support to do this kind of work. That's another way of, in terms of economic justice. What are we doing about that? Because the MenEngage Alliance will say, we want to see women at the forefront, speaking to these issues, speaking and engaging men. But we are also faced with a backlash of men looking at, to say, because language is also very quite important. When you say MenEngage and you read it in English, the first connotation with men is that it is a man's cave. So what are women doing here? at least I have experienced this across Africa. I don't know how it is interpreted in other regions, but these are some of the things for me that come out as, big issues in terms of, language that we use, the resources that are available to advance this kind of work. What are we doing about it? So that we don't live in a bubble where we feel like we are actually doing something, but we are still stuck in one place, but we have faces that look like they're doing something.
Fantastic. And for you really bring the key questions, probably, those questions some, others may want to address. So absolutely, absolutely language and the complexity of this work and how this work has really been driven as a development project, especially looking at the power dynamics that, Anthony was also talking about in terms of how and who is resourced to do something, and the understanding of what the core, root causes of the issues that they are talking about and what it means for supporting and mobilizing certain group of population around it. And the language is such a important issue, definitely. So who would like to follow up on that and also try to, sort of see if you can, sort of relate to the question. It's a men's cave. What are women doing here? Go ahead, Teresa.
Yes, maybe I like to follow up because it really also touches a big challenge, I guess, at least how do we engage with boys and men, and who can, I hope you can still hear me. Yes.
Yes.
Because, for example, we also struggle with so-called identity politics, which of course is something that has brought us further, but on the other way, it also holds us back a little bit. I can give example, for example, when we go to schools and talk to the boys in Austria and Vienna, it's a very diverse population we have in schools. And sometimes it's very difficult because when I, as a middle-aged white woman, talk about women's rights, then sometimes I'm heard, but sometimes I'm not heard. And then we have the solution, okay, then we need a man who is more similar to the boys to talk about these issues. And for me, it's, on the one hand, it's good, but on the other hand, I think it's not good because human rights are universal rights and it should not matter who talks about it because I think we box us in again. I mean, of course, we use it and I think it's really good to have a diverse team, and this is something I think MenEngage Europe struggles a little bit, that we are not representing especially the youth population in Europe. But this idea, who can talk, whose voice is heard, and what are the issues we're talking about? Are they universal? And if yes, they're still culturally coded. And then how can we, for example, stand up for a universal issue when it's always questioned? No, it's not universal. In my culture, it's different. And what does this mean? You know, for example, to have this patriarchal culture. I mean, is it universal or is it local? I don't know. And how can we, for example, in Austria, reflect on our own history of violence? And in Europe, as Jens also said, and then who are we to talk or engage in a dialogue with the men around us, and who are the men and boys we're targeting? I quoting this. I think it was also brought up in one of the panels. Who do we focus on? And now in Europe, I think we tend to focus on the visible masculinities of migrant, and I have to say not only migrant, but Islamic men and boys. And what does this mean? And so I think this is a very interesting time, but also sometimes very challenging. So yes, what does it mean to have a women-led organization? But why shouldn't it be a man, and why should it be a woman? And do we box us in, and how can we open it? And at the same time, you know, not how do you say, negate our personalities or where we come from. Yes. So these are my thoughts.
Yeah, Exactly. You know, when we initially started, yes, Anthony, and I do remember we saying on the why component of why do we really need to work with men in this work was, yeah, if you really want other men to listen, you need a man to talk about it. And we just like, okay, but we were all taught by women. Over to you, Anthony. That is a good segue for you to jump in.
Yeah, sure. I again already this conversation is highlighting the different challenges and the different things we're dealing with in each region. This is maybe something we haven't had a lot of issues with. Maybe that's because our network isn't as developed as all of the other networks, and this is one of the growing pains that happens when a network grows and gets more influence. So hopefully that won't be too much of an issue. But maybe that's also because as Abad, the organization I work for, and a lot of work done in the region, it really spawned out of the women's movement. And so it was a lot of the women's organizations who took on the field and the lead in the field of masculinities and engaging men. And so even though we still have debates about where we put our emphasis strategically, resources, where is the focus when in our region there's so many issues that women are still dealing with, that is it effective to work with men and boys? One thing maybe we have not had on the ground is too much resistance towards women also leading the sessions and talking about masculinities. And I feel maybe that's a little bit because of the overly developmental context in which we work, where it is the women's organizations and NGOs that, as I said earlier, we're filling in the place of the government. So men do come to the Centers for the Ministry of Social Affairs in Lebanon, where we have a partnership with them as a women and girls safe space. So we actually have our female social workers and wonderful activists. They're on the ground giving fatherhood trainings. They've been trained in masculinities, and it maybe does take a little bit of sessions as normal to develop rapport with the men, but the response is usually quite enthusiastic from the men of really accepting issues of masculinities and the dialogue being led by women, as this isn't just an issue for men, but rather that gendered issue of masculinities and femininities. One place where I will say is a major problem for us is actually being able to build momentum and continue on that momentum. I think the Alliance has been great in allowing us to dictate our own path forward, working with us and our own ideas. But I feel this is a little bit of a resource issue. I do believe there is, my perception is that there tends to be less value placed on the ground initiatives sometimes, or we talked a lot about transformative change, but transformative change is a process that takes quite a while. And so from a man being aware of masculinities and beginning to change attitudes and behaviors to becoming an ally, and really what that means is not a process that is finished over 12 weeks, which is pretty much the maximum of time we get to work with individuals who are very, very marginalized in terms of refugee populations, people from the lowest socioeconomic status. And I feel that is one of the things that we're dealing with, alongside, as I said earlier, that there's a process by which we start to push on something. We were really excited this year about building on former successes in changing Lebanese laws, and we're really planning on going forward this year on laws concerning sexual violence against women in our country. And then the revolution happened. And when the revolution happened, as there were so many women on the forefront leading the revolution in terms of asking for political accountability. But as time went on, women's issues were negated from the dialogue. They became less prominent. And again, we come back to almost a status quo of the political turmoil that exists. Then the Beirut explosion happens, and all of our emphasis becomes, how do we help those most affected, especially women who again fall through the cracks, and refugee women, migrant women living in the country, and them trying to get home and not have access to their embassies. All of these issues tend to fall through the cracks of the bigger issues. So again, dealing with the momentum about focusing on the most marginalized population and women become a problem. And lastly, I'll say, it becomes an infrastructure issue. So now, thankfully, my internet seems to be going well. But many of our programs are very difficult. Our trainings, our work on the ground has stopped in Corona. And when we try to do those things online, we don't have the infrastructure to be able to carry out those activities with the same fluidity as maybe areas that have better internet access. So it becomes a class issue. If you can afford, if you have access to these things, it becomes easier. And for those who don't have access, we're attempting to do our programs over WhatsApp Messenger. And again, how much is that stopping that momentum that we keep on trying to build and letting this become a national dialogue, a regional dialogue, and having it focus on how men and masculinities affects the livelihood of women and what can be done.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think I would, coming from South Asia as well, I would relate to so many things that you all have been sharing on. So probably, good segue to Bilkis maybe to talk about, Pakistan have had amazing mobilization around Aurat March, and which is Women's March in Urdu. And yeah, good segue to women-led processes and how we relate to that.
Thanks, Lakshman. Actually, I work around, talking to women's movement and making alliances there has been rather successful. Initially, if I talk of 3 years ago, it was very, very difficult to talk about engaging men and boys because the general perception at that point in time was that men, as they usually get into all paid jobs, etc. Cooking becomes professional and men immediately nursing, etc. So this was a way of men taking over the space for women also, and in terms of resourcing as well. But slowly and gradually, with a lot of dialogue with women's movements, and it's not a homogeneous group. It has changed things a lot, and there are more and more feminists, even some radical feminists, who are now, talking about responsibilizing men, accountability around that. With the government and, National Commission on Status of Women, the government usually likes engaging men and boys because of the language. They are moving away from gender. They forget the last part of gender equality, and they are very happy engaging men and boys. But in terms of other mechanisms, women's rights mechanisms, it has been at a personal level where you get the leadership, which is, more feminist oriented and women's rights oriented. You get more successes. But one of the huge successes that we have had due to Corona is, media engagement. Because we, like Anthony mentioned, working through WhatsApp, working through other, mechanisms, phone conference calls, etc., etc. We had to move away our advocacy towards engaging media much more. And in this case, we worked with a private television channel, Hum TV, and eventually on SRHR and, early and forced marriages, Hum TV was able to bring in a number of parliamentarians who would not have listened to us. In any case, they were very happy to get their faces, beautiful faces on TV and to be able to say their piece. But for us, it meant that due to this media engagement, we were able to reach over 1 billion people in Pakistan and South Asia. And there were over 28,000 engagements on social media. So that's what we found was a kind of moving away from the traditional norm of advocacy. And this was due to COVID, because people could not, people could not move out, etc. And then also in terms of accountability, more towards women's rights groups as well. And what we realized there too was that, again, there are women's rights groups who work only on the basic needs. There are ones that work on the strategic needs. There are others that have various, basic needs sectors that they call transformative. So the discussion around the dialogue of what is transformative and what is not was again a huge learning from our point of view. And the last point I want to make, I know you are short of time. The last point I want to make is also engaging NGOs and CSO representatives in economic justice. So making the bridge, because at the moment in Pakistan, CSOs usually work on social development issues and they shy away from the economy. But Pakistan is in its 22nd IMF program, and every time we get, conditionalities on regressive taxation, on, cutting the jobs, on salaries, cutting salaries and payment term sizing, right sizing, the dialogue and the scenario, and how it has pushed women more and more into informal labor, how their jobs have been cut, how economically negatively impacted they have been, and the process of feminization of poverty has really, really heightened there. So that, and then, a little bit more when we have time on the climate justice issues, because women themselves in the communities come up with these, with the way their lives have been and their children's lives have been impacted with the smog, for example, both in India and Pakistan, and some places in Bangladesh as well. So how is environment and carbon emissions, etc., affecting them? Because they have then to spend more time on caregiving, on nursing children, because of all these, environmental issues. I'll stop there in the interest of time. You know me. I can go on and on.
Absolutely, we definitely know you, and also know that the points you raise are extremely important. And then that's probably a good segue to Jens when we talk about gender transformative approaches. I do remember we talking quite a lot. What do we mean by that, and how does it relate to what we are doing? So yeah, Jens, over to you.
Thank
you. I'm not sure that I'm in the place to tell you all what gender transformative work is. I think we are still trying to find out, but we clearly know, I think, what is the importance of it. And I think actually I've heard so much now. I'm really full of thoughts and I don't know where exactly.
Go ahead.
But let's take your invitation to say that it's not. I think it's not just gender transformative. It's really everything transformative work that we need to do. There were some things Anthony said. I think I want to continue on the question: who and what is resourced, and what can we focus our limited resources on, and what do the funders want? I heard other people also say. If we want to work for social justice, we need to transform everything or many things on all the levels in the socio-ecological model, from individual to institutional. And we are often funded to work to change the most marginalized groups of boys and men. Migrant men, men of color, Muslim men, working class men or poor men or whatever. But actually what they need is empowerment. And then we get in the strange stretch that we are empowering men in a patriarchal society who are marginalized and oppressed by white supremacy, by classism, by poverty, etc. And the ones that we are not really transforming are the ones in power. The privileged men in the Netherlands, almost 20 years ago already, we had a minister saying, well, gender equality has been accomplished now. So men and women, oh, actually, this is the introduction to the kitchen table, because he said men and women are equal now, and they will have to solve their problems at the kitchen table. And then, of course, the men didn't come, and they still don't come to the kitchen table to discuss gender equality, but only to be served. So we started to have conversations, to invite men to the kitchen table and to have conversations about this. So there is the men in power who often still, if they engage with gender justice, they do so from a very traditional he for she perspective. I will save that poor women, the damsel in distress. And there is the white, heterosexual, middle-class, middle-aged, privileged men like myself, who are actually seen as victims of feminism gone too far, of feminization of education, of society. We are not allowed to be real men anymore. And then this same minister at that point said, oh no, but wait, men and women are equal. Yes, that's all true. But we still have those migrants. And in those migrant communities, women are old-fashionedly being oppressed and men are old-fashioned oppressors. And so we have a very double relation to gender equality in the Netherlands, and I think in many Western, Northern white countries, dominant white countries, where we think we are ready, but people of color still have to change, and men of color are really the bad guys, and we are really the good guys. So if you ask about gender transformative work, I think it should be about offering perspectives for human development to the marginalized and oppressed communities of boys and men and women and girls, of course. But it should also be really to challenge the men with privileges and the men in power, not just to help out those poor others, but to really reflect on their own position, their relationships, their behavior, the male-dominant cultures that they sustain, the hegemonic masculinity that they share with each other in all the boardrooms and in the positions of power. And I feel I get agitated now because I experience this as such huge challenges. We have such limited resources. We're always trying to get the most out of it. We are forced to work in directions that are actually sometimes even counterproductive or reproducing negative stereotypes, racism, etc. And the ones in power still remain kind of out of sight. To say it in other words, we don't get money to be norm critical. We get money to adhere to the norms. and then it's difficult because how can you transform the norms if you are funded to reproduce them? Yeah. So I'm not sure if this is the answer that you were hoping for, but it's the best answer I can give right now. And I'm really looking forward to reflections of others to what I've said.
Perfect. I think, yeah, the idea is not to have answers to the questions, but also add more questions to this equation. I think we need more questions in this conversation too. Probably that's a good segue to Samita. And I believe, you have been raising so many questions in the context of Sri Lanka, also including, talking to men in power positions, especially politics, and that you work at both the policy level as well as the grassroots level. What would you like to add in this conversation?
Yeah, I think especially coming from a very dynamic, culturally diverse setting as South Asia, I think it makes, from our perspective, it makes things more challenging for us because, looking at all the intersections that we need to look at, for example, the caste system, or it could be the majority ethnic groups that are in power, or the kind of, the religious groups who are the majority and who take the decisions, and which also kind of, bind into the nationalistic and other component that supports the systems that had been run by the policymakers or the political leaders. And again, kind of, what I see is that it also interconnects with we being a kind of a post-colonial social system where people in post-colonial social system are kind of sometimes unable to understand their real position. They sometimes they are in the mindset that of course we are being oppressed by a kind of a superior white people, but again from their own position, how they look at their own people who are in the grassroots or in the rural settings or who are in the low economic and caste or whatever social lower positions. Again, in the same manner, in the same power driven and that control driven way that they are looking at their own people. So it's like it's a kind of a trap, for people like us in our context. It's kind of a trap that we are finding it really difficult to take ourselves out, because people who are in power as the people who kind of create the system, it's difficult for them to come out of the system and look at the things that needs to be adjusted. I mean, especially for men. I think it's even more difficult for men, because women, being the oppressed kind of party throughout the history, it's easy for them to come out of that system and look down and see how the system needs to be changed. But men, as the creators of the system, it's really difficult for them to get out of that trap. And that is the major challenge, bringing men into the table from this kind of a scenario. It's really challenging to make sure that, of course, we do work to engage men from both at the national and the rural grassroots level. But bringing men into table, again, we have been questioned. So who are these men? Who are the men representing MenEngage Alliance? And why are they the people who always come and talk in front? And, it again brings the question whether these men, or are we to bring men into the table? Or whether the men who come into the table, do they talk the right thing? And while doing that, do they walk the talk? So all these things, I think, create a lot of questions, a lot of dialogue, and it's quite challenging for us to find, as you said, answers to these. But these are the things that we have to analyze and kind of, find our own ways of managing within the context that we are being given. So it's, I think, coming from South Asia, coming from with a lot of experience with working with the grassroots men, I think it's really important for us to see. I mean, I also bring the discussion on that we focus only on the individual level and not on the system, kind of structural level. That also is a kind of a challenge that we need to analyze within the MenEngage Alliance, because sometimes systems are individuals. So I have experienced that. I have kind of, that is how the power is being used, systems are being manipulated by individuals. So it is really important when it comes to certain levels that you really change the individuals. So that is where you have to kind of, shift between working at the grassroots and changing the individuals, and then kind of, again shifting into the national higher authority level, and then kind of, see how individual approaches might work, and maybe like how kind of use that to change the systems. So it's very contextual and very challenging kind of a situation where we need to kind of find our own shifts. And with that in mind only, we actually generate discussions at these two levels, and we kind of, sit at the tables where we contribute to the national action plans and make sure that certain, the engagement of men is properly looked at for gender justice. Not quite, as Bilkish also said, not just, that they have forgotten the whole part of gender equality and just they have, tick a right on the box that, okay, we have engaged men, kind of, So all these are kind of, things that we are looking at in our day-to-day processes, day-to-day thinking of how we need to take the MenEngage Alliance forward. So I'll stop.
Thank you, Samita, for making those. So anyone who would like to react to what you just all shared, so feel free to jump in, or would like to build or ask more questions. Go ahead, Anthony.
Yeah, I just want to again say how much, if we want to talk about the alliance, especially the global alliance as a whole, how helpful it has been. From the perspective of there's so much that has already been shared on how to work with faith-based groups, faith organizations through different faith that we've implemented, that we've learned from other people about engaging youth and how to engage youth and to discuss the different intersections of youth in our different parts of the world. I don't think you can measure the value of how much the network does for us in that sense. I think also, to be a little introspective here, it's also good for us to question ourselves in our own work and challenge our own inherent biases. In our region of the world, our programming is still quite heteronormative, and we still have failed to, we have included several organizations and individuals who are non-binary, non-gender conforming, who do work more with that. Work hasn't necessarily translated into overt work on masculinities in the region, which is something that is made aware to us when we hear of the wonderful work being done outside. And it constantly is a reminder of different dimensions that we also need to think about and create a dialogue for. Environmental, I've heard so many of my colleagues mention environment and gender. This is one of those topics that really there are few people working on it in Lebanon. Still, whenever we have revolutions or whenever we want to, the people want to stop the government, they still go down to the street and burn tires. The dialogue did come up a little bit at the beginning of the year during the revolution of that is still killing the environment, but that's not the headspace, and it's upon us and other NGOs and other informed and privileged individuals to create that dialogue. So I just wanted to jump in and say that, and how much I appreciate that, and how much that does cause us as an alliance and as individuals within the alliance to keep challenging ourselves and growing despite our own individual and contextual challenges. And also I love how neocolonialism is brought up, and very much that third world feminist problem that we also face in Lebanon, that women's organizations face in Lebanon, that militarism is and nationalism and these things are starting. I'm hearing a lot more discourse about it, especially over the past number of years, which is wonderful. But maybe there isn't enough of a connection of how nationalism and that type of militarism and militaristic masculinity in the West impacts areas such as ours in the Middle East or in other places. When we talk about militarism, we still think very much of the jihadist running around with a machine gun, or maybe a state that takes away human rights of people. But then it depends on which states we're talking about, because it seems to be justified by some and not by others. And then even for those who say all of those overt forms of militarism are wrong, the questions of weapons development, funding for different groups also falls by the leeway. So again, I think there's a power that one of the themes of the symposium is power with. And I think that emphasis is so strong in the Alliance, and how much all of us are informed by others' perspectives. And really, after every one of these opportunities to sit with people from the network, we really are inspired and we come with a lot more to the table. So I think that needs to be mentioned, as we're currently doing a part of that process right here.
Absolutely. No, I think you bring so many important questions And also just wanted to remind for the rest of those who are listening in, please feel free to add your reflections, questions in the chat box. And also, since we are only 18 of us, we may be able to get some voice. And Jens also suggests that if we can open up that space for participants to do some reflection as well. So feel free to sort of jump into the conversation and contribute. And I see M4, over to you.
Thank you, Laxman. I don't know if I'll pronounce his name correctly. Is Jens? Is it Jens? Yes. Yeah. I loved what you said, because I think that is where the major struggle is, that our resource mechanism has a tendency of focusing on the grassroots communities. And I don't know if this is deliberate, that men in power are not targeted as a problem, because in my view, I think they probably pose the most problem, because they hold power, they set the agenda, they control the narrative. And there is a tendency that when policy is in place, when the legislative framework is in place, then all is good. The man in power should not be held accountable, because he's actually driving that mechanism. So I think this is one of the things that we are facing as the biggest challenges in terms of the gender narrative and where it is supposed to be going, because now we have a plethora of men that are in power who understand exactly what is happening. They understand exactly what is happening, and their pushback, it's silent. It's not as aggressive as those that are, maybe the grassroots level. So they are under the radar in so many ways. And because of that, we keep on repeating ourselves and being redundant in terms of the change process. So I don't know how, if it's possible that the resourcing mechanism should be flipped to say, okay, yes, there is policy in place, there is the legislative framework in place, but let us talk to the people that need to be setting the agenda, who are the men that are in power. Let us start, the kitchen table talk conversations with these men, because I really believe that is where the major block is. I have engaged with men at grassroots level in multiple countries, and I have found them to be very much receptive to the message. They may not, as Anthony has indicated, they may not change in 12 days. It takes time, but they are much more receptive to the message than the men in the offices.
Right.
So, the divide between your white collar men and the blue overalls men, I think that's another issue that we need to be talking to and unpacking where the issue is.
Absolutely. I think
thank you.
Thank you for bringing that up. I think that has also to do with the way probably the international development so-called field is shaped, because it is primarily shaped in a very colonial model to replace the colonization that used to happen before, and to keep up with the power with the countries from global north, to continue power over the countries in global south. And the whole challenge in that phenomena is because we feel that we have the countries that were colonized before through this physical means, where they were going into those countries and taking the lead. But now that the same colonization is happening in a different way, and I think the development sector has not been able to, or most of us in this field, we have not been able to really crack the colonial mindset that comes with the whole international development sector. And that's where the problem still lies, because we do programs and projects, not human development. irrespective of how human would like to define human rights, irrespective of any other organizations would like to define human rights. But if you look at the whole human development, human rights, the whole language is, sort of interpreted that in a way that will only solve to this colonial model. And I do remember we talking in South Asia at some point in time that what does a transformative work with men and boys look like is not, we don't need someone to come from US to tell us what that means. We can generate, we have the knowledge on how to engage men. What we need, maybe because of the poverty, because of the lack of resources, enough resources, we may need that kind of support, but those support do come with conditions. And as Jens was saying, that those conditions then become that we don't question the colonization that is happening in a different way these days. And I think most of us in this work have not really been able to get out from the same mindset, and challenging that becomes on in itself a quite challenging task. And this also brings a interesting point that came out in the intersectional feminist conversation last week. We are talking about decolonization, but are we ourselves decolonized first? And also, talks with what Samita you were bringing up. Are we those who say we are, trying to contribute in this work? Are we ourselves colonized or decolonized? So that's an important question. I think I'm jumping in as a discussant as well. That's a brilliant point actually to think of. Why do we fall so much into the trap of donors? Teresa and then Samita.
So sorry, but thank you for this bringing up this important question, but it's really very close to my heart. Mm-hmm. I do not think that, at least in Austria, we should not use public money to fund programs for the wealthy people, the wealthy men. They should pay for themselves, to transform. So mm-hmm. This is at least what we try to do, because resources are so little. And we have this argument very often, yes, but they need to be transformed. And then we say, yes, but they have the funds to pay for their own transformation if they want. Because I really think that these free workshops we have, and we have to fight for everyone, should be given to boys who cannot afford it. Just a minor point. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Samita and then Jens.
The one point that I want to add here is that referring to the education system that we have in our countries, mostly in South Asian context, it's very much colonized kind of a education system where, we from our side say that it's a very traditional education system, but we know that it kind of, supports the patriarchal kind of mindset within the education. So we are talking about the transformation, but again, we are again and again socializing our boys to become those kind of patriarchs, So there is no kind of critical dialogue happening at the school level. So just to kind of, looking at one of the comments that also came in the chat box, I want to add that, in terms of what we are doing in our own context, we have been recently connecting with the Ministry of Education and other education systems to kind of introduce few tools that they can use to engage boys and to have this critical dialogue with boys, both with the Ministry of Education and also with the Ministry of Vocational and skills development. Those two components are very crucial to a country in terms of like how you kind of bring the next generation into the whole social economic system, and if you do not kind of intervene in those aspects, to change the way that we have been taught and the way that we learn, it's very difficult to kind of then think about what they will become as young people and what is our role would be in future to change them. So that also I wanted to add in.
Yeah, thank you, Samita. Jens?
I raised my hand in response to what Teresa said. Principally, I would agree, but in practice, I see the problematic reality that wealthy white men who pay for their own workshops, they don't go to transformative workshops, but they go to workshops that reproduce ideas about men as new warriors, archetypical heroes, angry fathers, or whatever. So there is a challenge for us. How, and I would like to make a connection to what I experienced last week. What I thought was very important. There were 2 sessions on inner work, and this is what is often happening in those workshops where the wealthy, privileged men pay for themselves, and they do actually interesting inner work, but not in a feminist informed or political or social framework, but very much to improve their own lives. And at the same time, we are often very much talking on a social, political, abstract mental level. And we are maybe encouraging others to do the inner work, but we are not always integrating that in our own practice. So I think it would be interesting to look for ways. That's why I was very happy with those sessions last week. I think it would be interesting for us as MenEngage Alliance, as member organizations, dealing with the political and the funding issues that are on the table now, how we can transform our own ways of doing. Because if I'm very blunt, I think we are operating within a patriarchal framework of how we learned to operate. And it would be interesting to look at ways to be different, to, as I said in the chat, not to use the master's tools to try and dismantle the master's house. And I see the challenge in that, because we have also to operate within this reality. But yeah, thank
you. Yeah, thank you, Jens. I think, and then Paul also sort of agrees in the chat box on the analysis and says I can't thank you enough to Jens for bringing that perspective on really looking at and that also brings to one of the question that actually came up in the plenary yesterday, is would the empowerment work that used to be applied with women and girls apply for men and boys, or should we be thinking differently? I think that's a brilliant point to think about, because the empowerment, the same women's empowerment kind of work, probably may not support the kind of what we want to do with boys and men. Anthony, over to you.
Yeah, I just wanted to build on what everyone has kind of been building on and talk about how important that is, that accountability has become such a big issue. And I know that the MenEngage has really focused on accountability, but even going, so what does accountability look like for myself as a man working in the field? What does accountability mean for any men in their normal lives, and how do they feel? And I think we do have a moderately decent hold on that. There are conversations being held on that. We can have those dialogues and conversations, but accountability in the full sense of the word needs to go up. The more power and responsibility you have, the more you need to be held accountable. And I think that there's a ceiling. I think there's a point at which it's not a question of should men in power be held accountable. I think everyone has wholeheartedly said, yes, we need more accountability, and yes, men in power need. How? Are there mechanisms in place by which we can actually hold men accountable instead of just talking about it? Because I know in the region that I'm from, attempts to hold powerful men accountable usually have a response of resistance, violence, because they've attained power through power over means. They understand power through power over means, and again, that's that almost psychological burst of response. Then what you've been doing hasn't been working. You do it to a greater extent. So what is our response here? It's simply calling for accountability without having discussions of, is it possible? What are the mechanisms by which that is done? And this is where maybe we need more accountability from international actors and international players who do have a lot of power of, are there international mechanisms even in place to hold men accountable? And if not, how do people on the ground buy in and believe what we say about the need for accountability and the need for holding people accountable to reach equality?
That's great point, and also what info you brought up in the beginning too, but also really in relation to just joining on that, I think looking at the way we operate as international development actors, or in some ways we call ourselves as activists. I think accountability and honestly within MenEngage as well, the way we are seeing is we refer to accountability standards. We have toolkits, we have trainings up there, but those have been used as a way to actually get away from being held accountable. And I think that a way is important, also being quite blunt into the conversation, that for us, we should not be thinking that MenEngage has an accountability standard and hence we are above being held accountable. I think there has been some cases internally that we need to actually reflect in the way we operate ourselves, and is having accountability standard enough? How do we move beyond just having papers, but bringing them in our lives? Bilkis, I see your hand raised.
Yeah, thanks, Lakshman. I wanted to say similar things that you have said already. Within our own organizations, for example, in the MenEngage Alliance, how patriarchal are our systems? Within women's movement, for example, and I'm criticizing myself, what kind of hegemonic power do the leaders hold? How do they treat the rest of the members who are not as good or as fluent in English language, for example? So, hegemony of the language, how we use these systems or even knowledge to exclude others. Who is being excluded? There are so many questions around that. And linked to that question is, the question of control over theorization, pedagogy, and knowledge that is imported from the north to the south, and where there's little, participation by the global south. And then how we, adopt that and, try to retrofit it to our own system. There has been a lot of discussion around culture, and the dominant idea, for example, has been that culture works against women's rights. However, there are several indigenous examples in Pakistan, for instance, where in the communities, the dominant dialogue and discourse had been, you're not a man if you hit a woman. And where have those, indigenous systems gone? Have we tried to include them? And, I'm challenging myself here as well. For example, if there were men faith leaders training men to become patriarchal, where was the women's movement? Why were they training their own women faith leaders or men faith leaders with a gender lens? So there are so many things that one needs to think around and discourse around in all of the scenario. And I really like Anthony's, dialogue around, are we accountable? Are our organizations accountable? Who are we accountable to? Are we accountable to PMER developed by a donor, or are we accountable to our own people and to us and to our staff with that duty of care? So, over to you. Thank you.
Great. Info, go ahead.
Thank you very much. The issue of accountability is very, very interesting when we are in a fund. I'm saying this because in part we need to move forward, but we also need to move forward creatively. What I have observed is that this space, this platform, the gender narrative platforms, I don't know if it's intentional, deliberate, or it's just a hindsight that we don't try as much as possible to be creative and innovative. Mm-hmm. We are talking about a funded accountability mechanism, because basically that's where we are at the moment. Instead of saying, okay, Lesotho, Nigeria, Kenya, issues in your culture, in your context, that would engage men, because they are there. I know they are there. And I know they are there in, almost any community, given whether be it a white community, brown, yellow community, but they are there. But we never get to the core of where the issue is. It's more whitewashing. As long as we seem to be doing something, it is okay. And really, it brings back the issue of, trying to, dropped a very interesting phrase here that if you want to take down the master, don't use the master's tools. So I sometimes I feel like we are in a catch-22 situation where we are made to seem to be doing something, but we don't take it far along to say, let us get into the Sotho culture, to say, in the Sotho culture, is there a social accountability mechanism for men, because it is there, for women, because it is there, in the Nigerian, Igbo, Yoruba, is there a mechanism of accountability? Because they are there. The colonization issue is problematic because it sort of clumped everything that Africa was into a negative thing. So we removed ourselves from these systems and mechanisms that we used to use, even those that were positive. And now we tend to see them as negative. So I think going forward, so that you don't seem to be talking about one thing all the time, is that maybe we also need to change approach in terms of saying, let us get into the core of who these people are and try to be innovative and creative within their own context and systems and work from there.
Absolutely. I think, and yeah, again, that goes back to what I was saying earlier as well. The way whole development system is understood, what a development means, is very problematic. And that is what, lies at the crux. And those of us who are in this sector, are we trying to push back against that modality of so-called development? And I do remember, when I was in Erbil doing a training for our colleagues in Iraq, well, they would prefer not to term them as Iraq, but more of Kurdish region. That looking at the culture, their own history, was an extremely eye-opener to me to understand the Middle East culture and how rich and just culture it has been. And I think that's the reason why we thought to also take up the Ubuntu as the theme of the symposium is an African context first, but also a very strong social accountability embedded philosophy that used to be there or still there in some parts in Africa region, that had a very strong social accountability mechanism. And probably I think it will be helpful also then to move on to address some of the questions in the chat box, especially looking at, okay, we know these are the challenges, but what are we actually doing about it? Asks what are the tools that can impact in the work that we do with Men in Power, and how can we reach those men? And also in relation to that, Jens adds a perfect segue to that also. How can we challenge the power over by the means of power with? And then Gimu from Roambek adds on a great conversation. For me to engage men and boys masculinities, it will be necessary to include MenEngage tools in the school curriculum from an early age, as well as strengthening the commitment of religious, probably leaders, because these two ways, school and religion, are cross-border. Exactly. And I think also looking at, when we even refer to as MenEngage tool, there was a big critique of the term MenEngage in the intersectional feminist panel. Any reflections on that, if you want? So now we're rounding towards the end. So if you would like to address to what concrete tools do we have or are we using in our own regions to address the challenges we are just talking about, and then how do we really move from power over to power with? Go ahead. Yes.
I just want to say I'm really moved by what Mfo. I hope I pronounce your name correctly. Now, Mfo.
I give up.
I
Jens, pronouncing
But I would like to try. Anyway, what you said really gives me the shivers. This is my insights and takeaway from here, and I'm not. It's not concluded yet, but I think it is. It's for me an important insight to look or to ask the question: in whatever culture or community, is there a social accountability mechanism for men and for women? And as self-evident and logical and fundamental as it sounds, I think when we talk about especially the white men in power in Western, Northern, whatever cultures, traditions, this is kind of the problem, because if I ask myself that question for my country, my culture, my tradition, I'm not sure if it's there. If it was, maybe we lost it, because we've been living in a tradition of power over for so long. So the social accountability mechanism that we think makes sense, or that we learn makes sense, is mental, is not from our own culture, but it is somewhere externalized. It is. It's what has been called the human or the universal thing, but then it's not from us and about us anymore, but it is what we learned that we need to spread around the world. So maybe this is where the importance of inner work comes in, especially for these privileged men in power positions, because I feel we are kind of alienated from that sense of social accountability from within. This is at least what struck me very much, and what I will take home to reflect on more, because I think this makes a lot of sense, and it really moves me. Thank you.
Yeah, no, great reflection, Jens. I believe, probably I think some of the countries from global north have been so much involved in looking at more on how can we be dominant in the larger world. But I'm sure if you look into the histories, similarly, I remember talking with one of our colleagues who is also from Netherlands. The history of Netherlands do have a very rich culture. If you look at the indigenous groups, which is a very minor group, as I understand, I'm sure there will be, but I think that's more around how do we become, or how do we inbuild the humanity into the conversation and bring human in the conversation as an element. And maybe if you are saying that, then in terms of the education or so-called development, should we then turn it around? Why can't global north learn from global south? Teresa, go ahead.
Yes, just two quick remarks. One, you already mentioned that we can also learn from women's history. For example, we've done a lot about oral histories that have not been written, because, as we know, history is always written by the winners. And I'm sure that also in every country we can find more gray areas and shades. And to Shay's question, how can we reach men in power? I also think that we can look it has been a feminist issue, I think, for a very long time. Do we have to go into the governments or institutions to change them? And I think to a certain aspect, yes. And the problem it is with politicians in Europe I see now is that the women that are in power, I think with some exceptions, are from conservative parties. And we really have to ask ourselves why liberal women or left-wing feminist women so seldom, are supported by their parties. Because I think that this is the level we have to enter. And in Austria, at least, we had a feminist minister for women's affairs in the 1980s, and she really changed a lot. But of course, it was hard work. But I think this is the only way, or one of the ways, to reach this man, because you have to sit on the table. If you're outside on the door, well, your voice is not heard. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Anthony, go ahead.
Yeah, so I just, Teresa, that was an excellent point. Thank you so much. And I think we constantly run the risk of repeating the problematic history of patriarchy in terms of women work without funding, without resources, with just their belief system and their blood, sweat, and tears, and women's organizations and feminists to a certain extent. And then when it gets enough notoriety and when it gets enough publicity and when it's achieved an element of importance that now developmental fields or international organizations or governments want to take it on, they take it out of the hands of the women's organizations that set the tone for the conversation, and it takes a completely different tone. And it's, I mean, obviously natural. The more people we have in a conversations shifts and change. But I think it speaks very highly to the necessity of keeping these voices central in leading the process in order to actually have conversations that are meaningful in terms of accountability, in terms of shifting power over to power with. And then our discussions of masculinities are how do alternative masculinities aid in that in order to be allies? In what ways do patriarchal and militant masculinities shift in order to devalue that? And again, I really appreciate that. And Samita and Belkis also mentioned a lot of third world feminist issues. And one of the things that kind of circle around this development issue and the neo-colonialism is in the third world, women's organizations then have to justify human rights as not being Western and part of a Western agenda. And so they're stuck between the identity markers of, well, in our culture, this is coming from the West, and they're almost pitted as anti their own culture versus being anti-sexism, anti-violence, anti-disruption of human rights, that are actually also histories in our culture that have been wiped clean or don't get enough attention. So I think also we need to let, as much as we say it, actually try more, and everyone, including myself, everyone can try better to have that process be informed bottom up as much as it tends to be informed from the top.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And also, now we are kind of circling back to what we started in the beginning. Actually, in the work, if you look at how the work with men and boys even evolved, was because it was feminists who helped or realize or helped men to realize they are also gendered beings. And now everywhere we go, when it comes to gender, then either it's men will ask, what about men? We are gendered too, as if they have discovered that. And I think the lack of humbleness to really acknowledge the fact that it was the women's rights movement who helped us to realize men are gendered and patriarchy has a negative impact on their lives too. And hence, men need to step in to challenge the system that is impacting everyone, keeping the center on the people who are at the margins of the margin. And I think we keep on repeating that mistake by not being humble to the fact that where our roots are becomes an important. Go ahead, Belkis.
Yeah, just a few, last minute reflections. and also sharing experience. Like, a number of us mentioned, education. In Pakistan now, we are working as MenEngage Alliance, we are working with the Ministry of Education. It's actually National Curriculum Council. And because they are working on one curriculum and one textbooks for everyone in Pakistan, we have tried to introduce gender equality aspects and men and masculinities aspects within that through life skill based education. So that's one effort, because we really believe that unless we catch them early and try to minimize the impact of socialization that all children go through right from the beginning, first messages in the childhood that they receive. So that's one. The second one is around militarization. There's, I mentioned in South Asia how India is upset with Nepal. India is, every day we hear recce's on Pakistan soil and with other, countries as well. So I think we would like to focus more on people-to-people diplomacy, because there's no way we can, impact the politicians and the government. And that's a very huge example of power over, because it's fight for power and it's fight for masculine power. And, militaries are very, very masculine mechanisms. So that's another one that we are trying to do. I mean, not to say that it's eating up a lot of budget of social development in all of our South Asian countries. And in terms of reviving indigenous solutions, it's very important. Although at the same time, we change the language also. We go to KP, which is a very, very masculine government, very few women there. And the moment we say gender equality, they say, Mara, what is this gender bender? It's a Western, idea and agenda. So then we change the language. We say, sir, the way you send your daughter to school and the way you send your daughter to the doctor, we want that for all girls. And we have never had, so changing language, challenging it, adapting it to our own context is very, very important. And last but not the least, I really want to, I haven't done this so far, so I want to thank all MenEngage Alliance members all over the globe who have, and particularly, the Global Secretariat who have provided us with this opportunity for reflection. Thank you, Lakshman. Over to you.
Thank you. I think it's all because of all of you, without, again, coming back to the roots. You are the roots for whatever we intend to do. And I think some of us who happen to be here is also because of your support. I don't think, it's a collective effort rather than individuals who are in a particular role, because it's all your support that we are in this role. And if you are not there, this role don't mean anything, basically. I think that's that's the kind of relationship we would like to foster moving forward, so that it doesn't become some of us who come from a global South country, but then are located in global North, enjoying the same level of power and not being reflective enough on the way the conversation we are having today, and relating that to our daily lives. I think that's what accountability needs to be all about in terms of the way we relate and the conversation. So again, I'm really sorry that we were not able to have David join us for some what seems to be more from a technical perspective. I see his name in the list, but can't hear him. David, we really are missing you. If you are able to hear us, we would have loved to hear from you as well. So we are on the last 7 minutes of the conversation. It has been an amazing conversation. So each one of you, anyone who would like to jump in, a final key message to everyone starting today. And as I said in the beginning, this is a beginning of a series of conversations that we will have for the cross-regional networks. And hopefully you all will be able to continue joining us every month, and it will be every month with new people or same people again, depending on how the regions would identify who would be able to join and who is available. So any final wisdom before we say bye to each other for today?
Just to take 1 minute, I think for me, the most important takeaway, not from today's discussion only, but whole of the symposium, as Bilkish also rightly mentioned, is the space that had been created for self-criticism, self-reflection of looking at our own selves in terms of our own behavior and in terms of our functionality at the country and the regional levels. So I think it's really important that we kind of take these learnings back into our context and see how we can kind of use those learnings to kind of bring the understanding that we want to create as a kind of a global network. So that is one thing I think I want to add. And of course, as I also mentioned at the last regional reflections at the closing event, as you also, Lakshman, correctly mentioned, we really need to look at the history of our women's movement and learn from that and see how we have to, how many things that we have to, absorb when creating our own path in terms of engaging men and boys. From very small ages, women have been always told that you are responsible for your own actions. That is the main thing that had been taught to us, but not to men. They have never taken the responsibility for their own actions. But we have been again and again, from home, from school, everywhere, we have been told that. And I think it had been now gone into our own blood. And for us, it's so easy for women to kind of, be that, be into that self-reflection and question our own selves. So I think we need to take men on the same path. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Samita. Who would like to go next? Just unmute and go ahead.
I can go next. I think what is a takeaway for me, but also from my daily work, is that also feminism or feminisms and masculinities are not stable concepts or accountabilities. So we have to also look at them constantly, because we change, the world changes. And what has been maybe right also to look on gender as in the 1970s might be not, this shoe might not fit today. And I think this is a big challenge, especially when you were socialized with a specific type of feminism, for example, as I was, of course, in the 1990s. Then how do we adapt, and how can we learn from each other and still respect each other, and how can we think about our own stereotypes and this schematic thoughts we sometimes have. For example, wow, a man enters the feminist sphere, then he must be a good man or whatever. I mean, also these stereotypes we have within ourselves, and they change. And I take this away that it's not over. So it's not now we reached some point and we're good, but that we really have to take this as a daily challenge. And I also want to thank all the participants. It has been a great conversation, and I'm looking forward to continue it. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you.
I would like to throw in something. I think for me, for the longest time, I felt like what we are doing is more like a war zone.
Oops.
We're losing every day.
You. Oh, okay. If anyone would like to go ahead while she can come back.
Okay, you lost me for a second.
Oh, you're back. Yes.
Yes, I'm back.
Go ahead.
Yes, I'm back. So I think maybe we need to try to work harder to make emphasis on gender as a relational issue. I know it is, we all know, about that here.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, I don't have answers, but maybe if we can put more emphasis on our relationships as women and men and how they impact on our daily lives instead of just this big thing that most people don't understand.
Yeah.
I don't know, because this monster that we've been fighting, that sounds like it's been a war zone for the longest of time. Yes, it has its own positives, but sometimes it can get tiring. Let us be honest. It gets tiring. It feels like you're not doing anything. So maybe we should be more humane in our conversations when we deal with these things, instead of just being policy driven, legislative driven, donor funding driven. You know, these things shadow the core of our conversation. Yeah. Which is the human conversation.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. Who else?
I just want to say real quick, thank you to everyone in the room, in the virtual room, for such a great conversation, for your comments on the chats. And I'm loving the way that we are approaching this from a very intersectional place, and we're really trying to espouse that intersectional approach, because this is where we can ask what questions are we asking and to whom. And I really believe that I personally, I can only speak, I grow every time we have one of these conversations, because these spaces become sites of negotiation, and it's an important part of that process. And how do we not only keep this a privileged thing? I mean, we're privileged to be here. How do we continue to do this on all levels, from the highest up, and focus on accountability to the lowest, and have these be sites of negotiation as well, of gender and dynamics, and leading the way forward from the ground and from the women's organizations.
Paul, yeah, I'm really happy that I agreed to be here. I've been saying that MenEngage is like my sangha, a word I know from my meditation practice, a spiritual community for me, a place of belonging. When the request came to send in a video with to answer the question what Ubuntu means for me, I couldn't send in anything because I knew Ubuntu from users here in the West that I sometimes also found problematic in terms of cultural appropriation, exotism, Orientalism, whatever, Western white projections on African culture. But now I feel I get a sense of it. I'm maybe experiencing something of it, or at least I feel it's getting meaning for me. So if I am, because we are, I am a bit more now because I feel we are more now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jens. Bilkis, or did you already go?
Well, I just wanted to say what an excellent conversation we have had. Thank you for this space. And, you know, my mind is reeling with so many ideas and discussion. It will take a week at least to process that. Thank you very much. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you all for your honest reflections, sharing, and this is what we need to continue having within the cross-regional spaces so that we can learn, understand, help each other understand better in terms of the work we are doing, and then also challenge and continue questioning our assumptions, our thinking on what this work means and should look like, and continue this conversation moving forward. So this was, thank you all again for amazing thoughts and honest reflections. I'm sure this will continue us moving forward in the next round as well, to have a series of conversations. Maybe moving forward, one of the ideas that came up in the planning session yesterday was maybe moving forward we can zoom into some specific topics or issues that could be of interest for different regions. And we will continue reaching out to you to figure that out what that would be, to have and delve into more critical reflections. And thank you all, and thank you also for the participants and for your joining today and your thoughts on the chat. And the conversation continues. And thank you all very, very much.
Thanks, Laxman. Thanks, everybody. So that's a wrap on that regional discussion. And yeah, really good. I know we're a bit over time, so I'm just going to wrap up quickly now. Great to hear from different angles, a lot of conversations on global power dynamics. And I think the themes there are really, really interesting to come up from different angles. And just on Jens's reflection, I thought that was really interesting, because one of the things I thought about the word Ubuntu is that has a lot to teach someone like me from a global North country. So that's what I thought made it really apt in terms of this discussion as well. So yeah, and I think we can close there. So thanks everyone for joining.